As a ballistic tester, I'm going to test the ammo that I would actually recommend people use when you're talking 9mm and 40 Smith & Wesson, and some of this I actually do use. So what ammo is that? You know, I got a lot of flack in the past for testing various different rounds that didn't perform very well, and people were getting mad like, well, that's the worst ammo you could test, you should have done this or that. And really, that's just how I do my testing. I test everything. I don't just test the things that I would actually carry. Now with this ammo, I actually would carry it. This is the ammo in 9mm and 40 Smith & Wesson that I would use, and that is our Federal HST ammunition, and specifically the 9mm plus P 124 grain, and with the 40 Smith & Wesson, it's specifically the 165 grain. And I do actually carry this 165 grain in this particular 5-inch pistol as a vehicle carry pistol. So I do trust it. I've done a lot of testing on it, and that's what I picked as a person that tests ballistics. So that says a little bit about that. And also with 9mm, you know, I don't do a whole lot of stuff with 9mm as far as carrying it. I do use it for home defense, but out of all the ammo I've tested, most 9mm kind of falls short in my opinion for its performance. But the HST does pretty well. Now, a lot of people know that in my 5-inch pistol, I've mentioned this before, this is what I actually use for home defense, the 9BPLE plus P+, because I feel like it's a traditional round, and it will pretty much break up a walls a little bit better than typical, yet it's still a traditional round that should do pretty well. But anyways, with this test here with our HST, I'm going to use my 5-inch barrel M&P in 9 and 40, and my 3.2-inch Taurus G2Cs in 9 and 40. So this should be a pretty fair test with the ammo that I would actually use. So we're going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get at the same time with those. Then I'm going to do my ballistic gel test, and this is my standard real-world simulation. 4 layers of sweatshirt material on the front of that first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4-inch MDF at the back, and then more clear ballistics. So that's what I use to simulate an actual living target, because there's ribs on the front and back. And by the way, this is about a half representation of the density of flesh. So if you were to get like 16 inches in here, it's more like 8 inches in a real living target. So we'll do our ballistic gel test with all four of those pistols there, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up, I'm going to run our 9mm ammo through the 2 different barrel lengths and see if there's a big difference in velocity, how much we lose going to a shorter barrel. So this is 124 grain plus P, right at 1,200 feet per second. So let's see how close I get to that in my 5-inch M&P here. 1235, 1216, 1216, 1216, 1210. So that's very consistent velocity. Now let's try our 3.2-inch barrel, see how much velocity we lose. 1122, 1127, 1142, 1113, 1120. So that's very consistent and respectable velocity. So now we'll move on to our 40 Smith & Wesson. This is rated at 1130 feet per second, and we'll see how close we get to that out of my 5-inch M&P here. 165 grain, rated at 1130. 1101, 1113, 1109, 1099, 1111. So, you know, below rated velocity, but not by a significant amount. Let's see how close we get to that with our little short barrel here. I didn't want to feed very well. That was weird. See how this does. 1031, 1045. Feed the magazine fell out. 136, 171, 164. So this pistol's pretty junky, but at least we can see that it's pretty good velocity overall. So pretty consistent. That's why I picked this ammo. So let's hit our ballistics gel block and see how these all compare. All right, so I'm going to start with our longer barrels, our 5-inch barrels for both the 9mm and the 40 Smith & Wesson through our real-world simulation target there, and I'm going to get pretty close just because I don't want, intersecting paths and all of that. So I get relatively close just to make sure I get all 4 of these rounds in the gel block spaced out. So here's our 9mm. All right. And here is our 40 Smith & Wesson. Let's go take a look. And those performed really well out of these 5-inch barrels here, really well. So we'll take a look at our rib simulation just to kind of see what's going on here. Yeah, and our 9mm did pretty well. Our 40 actually expanded a little bit bigger before it hit this. So just a little bit more energy dump going on there. Now in the first 3-inch piece, it looks like the 9mm actually created more damage in that gel. But if we just look at this overall, both of those did fantastic. Both those are very comparable wound paths, very comparable penetration, all of that. And I will say, in most of my testing, a 9mm doesn't have quite as big of a track as a 40 usually. That's why I picked this ammo, because this particular 9mm makes 9mm acceptable for me. Really good overall. And what we got is great expansion with our 9mm when we hit 14 inches of penetration. With our 40, we have a bigger hollow point just because it started out bigger, and we have the same thing going on, 14 inches of penetration. Very consistent rounds. Now, I have never tested the 40 through the short barrel. I have tested the punch, and that is a 165 grain with the same rated velocity, and that did pretty well, but I'm not sure how well it's going to do out of a short barrel. I have tested the 9mm out of short barrels, and they tend to do pretty well. So I'm curious to what we're going to get next with our short barrel test. So let's do our short barrel test now. All right, our 3.2-inch Taurus G2Cs. Let's see how this does. 9mm plus P. All right, set that with our 40 Smith & Wesson. Let's go take a look. All right, so I wasn't expecting that bullet to drop down with the 40 like that. It may have actually hit that 9mm bullet, but at that distance though, it does look like, we're gonna expel most of our energy anyways by the time we get there, so it's likely not gonna change anything. Very good performance with both. Our 9mm track is pretty much just as big as what it was through the 5-inch barrel. Really consistent, perfect expansion. Our 40 is interesting because it's a little less consistent. It goes in a little bit and it drops down a little bit. The actual track size looks about the same. And the penetration might be altered with that 40 a little bit also, just because it may have hit that bullet, but pretty good energy dump with both. I'm going to say about the same size hole going through there. So that's pretty good performance overall. Now our 9mm, I'm going to call it perfect performance. We hit about 16.5 inches, perfect peel back pedals, all of that. Our 40, the peeling back of the petals isn't quite as consistent. It's still pretty good, and we got about 15 3/4 inches of penetration, so both those did pretty well. I'm gonna call it about equal performance there. I'm gonna say with the 5-inch barrel, the 40 has a little bit of an advantage over the 9mm because it's got a bigger bullet at the end. As we're gonna look at the short barrels, I'm gonna call it about even because the consistency of the expansion is better with the 9mm, not as well with the 40, but the 40 started out bigger. Judging this before I actually go do the steel target drills, I'm gonna say I think in a longer barrel, our 40 is always going to be a better idea, but when we go down to a little bit shorter barrel, maybe not so much. So let's pull these out of the block. We'll take a close-up look at these bullets, and I'm going to shoot our steel and see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets. Here's the ones from our 5-inch barrel. Here's our 9mm, and here's our 40 Smith & Wesson. So, absolutely no contest here. The bigger bullet's going to win. The bigger bullet's going to do more damage. It's going to cut more. And when we're talking handgun velocities, that's really what counts. Extra velocity doesn't necessarily create extra damage unless you're getting a huge amount of velocity, like 2,000 feet per second. Handgun velocities, yeah, both did fantastic. I will say that. Both did fantastic. But our 40 is definitely better out of a 5-inch barrel. Now when we go to the short barrel, this is where everything changes up a little bit here. Our 9mm, there isn't much difference going to the shorter barrel versus the 5-inch barrel here. So our 9mm here did really well across the board. Any barrel length, great. Now our 40, we definitely suffered here going to that shorter barrel, just because we are dropping that velocity pretty low. Now if we compare the overall size here, it's gonna be about the same, but if we look at that, I haven't measured these yet, but they look about pedal to pedal about the same. And if we look at that and we look at that the 40 has significantly more recoil, well, in terms of that, the 9mm makes a lot more sense out of a short barrel, because if you're getting the same performance with more recoil and less capacity, that doesn't add up. But in the longer barrel, you're getting better performance and you're only dropping off 2 rounds of capacity. Well, that makes sense to me. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target, just my practical shootability drill. So I'm just going to do the short barrels up here at this close range of 14 yards. Just kind of see how these things shoot for me. So I'm going to try to hit the target as fast as I can and still accurately hit it. So 9mm, let's see how this does. All right, so just trying to get a quick front sight picture, and that is 42 feet away, so obviously my groups aren't great, but they still hit the target fine. So 40 Smith & Wesson, see how this does. Still doable. Definitely a lot more recoil here, probably 50% more. So it gets to a point where it's kind of uncomfortable to shoot, as we're with the 9mm. It's pretty practical to shoot that out of a short barrel like that. So let me back it up with our longer barrel and see how those do. All right, 40 yards from the target. So this is practical. There's been times where stuff like this has been needed in the real world. So I'm gonna see how these shoot and see if there's a big difference between the shootability and distance accuracy with the 9mm versus the 40 Smith & Wesson. So 9mm, yeah, this does. So that one that I pulled pretty significantly, I was trying to speed it up right at that round, and then I pulled it low. But I'm going to say that this ammo is very accurate, and for a 9mm, that hits really hard at that distance. So, as much as I talk bad about the 9mm, I absolutely would carry this 9mm. It's a pretty good load. 40 Smith & Wesson, see how this does. So I did see the steel moving around quite a bit more with the 40 out of this barrel length. So, you know, it's slower, but I'm going to say it would be more effective, honestly. It'd be more effective. So look at this. This is easy to sum this up. And this is pretty much how I do things in my own personal life. I think out of longer barrels, whether you're talking a 4.5 inch or a 5-inch barrel, somewhere around there, 40 Smith & Wesson beats 9mm hands down. You know, that's why I have multiple options to carry in my vehicle, and I'm thinking about like hard barrier penetration, stopping power, all this stuff, what might all come into play, and I feel like the extra bullet weight of the 40 makes a lot more sense versus a 9mm in that situation where you might be pinned in your car and you have to fight your way out of that. So I picked 40 Smith & Wesson, and I think it's a good choice. And I honestly bought this box of ammo because it's time to refresh what I got in my pistol. Now looking at the 9mm here out of a 5-inch barrel, it still did really well. It did really well, but I would pick the 40. Now looking at our short barrels here, it's kind of impractical in a way to carry 40 Smith & Wesson out of such a little short subcompact pistol. It's not bad, but it just takes that much more skill. It's not quite the level of like 357 mag out of a snub, but it goes a little bit higher than what I'm comfortable with when it comes to a little short pistol, and you need to control that, and you just need to, you know, I've trained with that and tried to just clear my mind and just let it go, and it becomes difficult to actually hit the target. Now when we're talking the 9mm, even in a plus P, that is actually practical out of a short barrel pistol here. So between the two of those, I would pick the 9mm versus the 40 out of a short barrel, because the consistency of the performance and expansion is better and it's more shootable. So 40 for a long barrel, 9mm for a shorter barrel. That's my opinion on this, and this is the ammo that, as a ballistic tester, I would actually recommend it. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.